Solar Podcast. I'm Priyanka Valavalkar, and today we are going to have a discussion on how our electrical grid is becoming the intersection between the next generation of electrical transportation, new generation technologies, and grid infrastructure. So let's welcome our guest, Mr. Siddharth Shah, to shed a light on today's topic. Siddharth is my colleague working in the solar domain of Vijay Engineering and Machinery Company. He has an experience of more than 5 years in the solar industry. He and his team have successfully commissioned solar projects in the government as well as the private sector. Siddharth, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Priyanka, thanks for inviting me and taking up a very important subject of discussion that needs to be put across. I think it would be an interesting conversation that we would be having today.
Yeah, sure. We hear a lot about solar grid connection nowadays. Basically, a grid connected system is the one that powers a home or a business with renewable energy during those periods when the sun is shining, the water is running, or the wind is blowing. That is daily as well as seasonally. Any excess electricity produced is fed back to the grid. This is as per my knowledge. So, pertaining to this, can you shed some light in detail on how the topic is connected to our current electricity grid infrastructure and energy supply chain?
Yeah. Basically, I'll start with one very specific important point that I need to put it across is that solar projects over a period of time, considering our government's commitment, has increased tremendously in the last 5 years. And I would say that this includes the pandemic times as well. It's our commitment. It's about reducing our dependency on fossil fuels. I think this is going to even grow much faster, quicker, and it would be an area of focus for all the governments across. I think the biggest challenge with this, which has been earlier, is also about our grid parity, and I'm specifically speaking about the utilities. So the next challenge that we face today is to maximize the utility of this power efficiently and reliably. I think these are two important notations that one has to keep in mind. See, let's look at present 10% of our installed power capacity is solar. And as I mentioned earlier, that this is going to keep on going up. It is not going to go down at any time.
Right.
So the near future challenge is that, how are we going to manage our grid infrastructure considering the pace at which we are going to grow. We also have to realize a very, very important point that the need for electricity for transportation will increase many folds as liquid and gaseous fossil fuels will go more scarce.
Right.
And I think, as I mentioned earlier as well, so this is also adding to the same point. Looking at the current condition, what I reimagine as a complete scenario is that the entire electricity grid, to a certain extent, will have to go into an overhaul of the existing infrastructure. Now, why is this important? Because we need to integrate it with the demand that is taking up in terms of growth through solar and go through your utilization of electricity for transportation. So if we don't bring in those grid strengthening activities and infrastructure changes, I think there will be a compulsory lag which will happen, and there will be a lot of fault finding that will take place in terms of the output and the targets that we are setting.
Right. So Siddharth, in short, in this scenario, we are looking at a condition where we have to reimagine the entire electricity grid and overhaul the existing infrastructure to successfully integrate the growth in solar supply and at the same time meet the changes in demand. So my next question is, if the solar integration with the grid is necessary infrastructure investment, then why are we seeing so many news stories regarding the difficulty of its complete implementation?
Priyanka, there is always difference between what ideally should be and what realistically implementation happens. First you conceive an idea, then you propose what needs to be done. It trickles down to what actually is to be done. There are multiple interested parties that are involved. This whole process seemingly can be put out in a plan properly, but it needs a phase-wise systematic evaluation of what actually is happening over a period of time. Now, the biggest issue with solar and wind energy as a source is that they are all fluctuating power sources in their nature. So I can't determine that I'll have the best wind conditions for this period to this period. This is all weather, so I can't really take. And with the changing environment, I may get very windy days, maybe some different months, and some different months I may not get wind at all.
Right.
So we stick to our fact that it's a fluctuating power source, which ideally means that the output varies according to a basic sunlight or wind. Now, what happens because of this? A variation in power, voltage, and frequency at the grid injection point, because whatever gets generation gets injected. The electric grid, realistically today, are more stable ones. Okay, and once they are stable, so there is a continuous supply, in power, voltage, and frequency, and that does not disturb the whole process. Now, if you look from a position of it being having an inputs of fluctuating power, then you will call this system as a delicate system. So these fluctuations cause the grid to deviate from its optimum operating point, and that becomes a critical issue. Now, this issue also can be mitigated to a greater extent in larger projects, because larger projects have more stable systems, they have more continuity in the system. They are available in very specific areas where all due diligence and study has been done in more detail. And utility scale becomes much more easier because you have a better and stronger grid load planning that happens. But in distributed solar, which is basically a dream where we say that at every building you need to be self-sustained, this always issue is going to be there, and this challenge is going to be present. So one needs to keep that in mind, and that is why you keep hearing those stories of difficulty, generation issues, optimum operating points. These all things are there. The important point ideally to note is things, these things can be solved, but couldn't be solved with the existing technology and resources. A lot of measures actually are being taken by power utilities and nodal agencies to accelerate this process and make the grid solar ready. But as I said, this is something that I've cooked in somebody else's house, and I have served in somebody else's house. I'm using the state power utility grids. We have, as I said rightly earlier, that we have put in the policies, asked people to set up, but we did not tell anybody at what pace you need to go. We've just made a commitment. So I think there is going to be a lag a little. The more closer we are to the difference between the lag and reality, I think the better it would be.
So Siddharth, taking into consideration the challenges, other technologies which you have mentioned just now, and measures taken by the power utilities and nodal agencies to accelerate this process and make the grid solar ready. So can you mention any such policy directive issued or hinted by the government for enhancing this grid connections?
Yeah, I just recently read a report, Priyanka. A report basically was launched by Niti Aayog and IEA Renewables, IEA, that renewable integrations in India 21 on 23rd July 2021. It was based on the outcome of a joint effort by 3 states, that is where there is maximum activity, according to me, which is happening is Maharashtra, Gujarat and Karnataka. So I could just highlight some of the critical findings that were there. It was stated that large shares of renewables can be better managed by shifting time of use in agriculture. TOU is a very important concept, that is time of use tariffs will be a very effective tool to incentivize demand side management and encourage flexible consumption in the daytime. I think this is something that was an output of that report. Further, POSOCO representative stated that renewable energy integration can start with proper resource planning and better implementation of technologies such as AI, base power, system management and smart grid interventions. I think monitoring and being more proactive in making those changes in real time basis, I think that is something that we'll have to bring in if we are going to go at the pace of growth that we are talking about today. Because manual interventions is simply very, very difficult at every point of time. So, an AI and a smart grid intervention system is going to happen. If you look at it, it is happening across industry as well. So we are talking about smart innovation, smart industries. So I think this is something that we'll have to adopt, implement, and go ahead with. I think that would really, I am very confident that the government must have taken steps with respect to this after their findings, and it is upon the industry to decide how they want to really resolve this problem jointly with the power utilities and nodal agencies. A very important point the report highlights that India's power system can efficiently integrate with renewables. That is basically the target of 175 gigawatt by 2022 and further 450 gigawatt by 2030. So what would be required to do that? To have a very, very effective grid management system, it would require very strongly the identification of resources, very, very important. What kind of resource do we really need to do this? It also requires a very structured method of planning with a very stronger monitoring mechanism, regulated parties who are very serious about this, and timely policy changes which are dynamic in base. Because as you go into that, there are a lot of things that will come up also as a challenge. And of course, you need institutional support. Energy storage becomes an important factor, of course, as battery operated systems are going up. EV storage packages are there. I think that will also help us enhance this system. And advanced technology initiatives, I think innovation will play a very, very important role, because this is something new that we are going to come across. This is not what has been experienced. References from other utilities internationally where they are ahead in terms of time, where they have created grid parity, they have made the existing infrastructure stronger. I think there is something that will have to go other than the study that has already been conducted.
Yeah, very well said, Siddharth. So with the solar will be a great revolution in the solar industry for sure. So my next question is, what do you think should be the end goal of the solar integration? Discussing about how grid integration of solar will help the growth of electrical transportation. Could you explain this in detail?
A very interesting question, Priyanka. In fact, a lot has been said about EV. Even every next person, if you meet, is talking about electric vehicles and how it is going to change, revolutionize India and the way we transport goods to individuals or to a self-drive car. I think it would be a very interesting proposition to integrate photovoltaic based power systems with EV. Charging loads make perfect sense due to similarities between in terms of power form, interface and location. But however, this integration involves a very high level of uncertainty due to the random nature of solar generation and EV charging, which always remains a challenge. This requires a very, very carefully controlled design and optimized system to keep it stable. I think the best way to look across is this, that the way agriculture and industry are sought to shift from their load to daytime, it could be a very, very similar strategy that could be implemented for an electric transport vehicle. EVs at the moment are a very, are an industry in India, at least at a very nascent stage. Where China was exactly 6 years back is where India is today. But of course, the ministry is taking very, very aggressive steps and also offering a great amount of subsidies for EV to become very popular. And asking people to shift from conventional mode of transport, those are engine based vehicles, to electricity or battery based vehicles. Okay, to have a higher grid integration of solar with your charging system, I think there needs to be subsidies that have to be offered for setting up charging stations with solar. I think that would be a great way to go ahead, and that would, and going to the complete operation of charging during the daytime. I think that will help, bring in this together. I'll take a very, very interesting example, though not a significant impact. One of the reports of KPMG estimates that the demand for electric vehicle charging will constitute as much as 8% of the total electricity demand by the year 2030, and also will increase the peak load from 200 gigawatt at present to 402 gigawatt, assuming that EV charging happens uniformly all throughout the day. Assume that we have 6,000 cars today, and tomorrow all the cars that have basically been manufactured became EV cars. Let's assume that this is a scenario in 2030. So I'm very confident that it would be a much more uniform system. So obviously your peak load will go up. So this is a very important topic that one needs to keep in mind from the future, from the point of planning today. I think, and it's very, very important that, if you want to reduce the load on your grid, it's very important to have an integration between solar and EV together. I think that's the way ahead. EV charging during the daytime peak hours when solar energy peaks can reduce this demand by around 40 gigawatt is what they have estimated in the KPMG report. That would be a 10% reduction, and I think peak reductions at 10% is a great thing to look at. So I think we've already discussed how more advantages of integrating solar with the grid for EV, and that makes more sense going ahead.
Yeah, definitely, Siddharth. EV is an upcoming new industry altogether. Since we're talking about EV charging stations, battery storage, and all those things, so I have read one article that some of the big shot companies who are coming into the solar industry are more focusing upon the battery storage systems. They're trying to innovate the battery storage thing. Then they want to enter this industry. So what do you think? How this thing will impact India's growth story from solar industry per se?
I personally feel that our peak demand has always been a challenge, in terms of power generation. And I think our per capita electric consumption capacity is going to go up, it is not going to go down. Battery storage is also going to go in a similar manner in which your solar module had gone, as economic order quantity goes up, we innovate, we identify, it will go up. And the basic reason is why electricity needs to be stored, simply put across. And it will act as a more self-sustaining solution where grid connectivity becomes a bigger challenge. Point number one. Second, you may be able to produce your own electricity and store your own electricity. And I think that would be a great way of having a much more distributed system rather than dependent system. So I think all in all, electricity would be produced, stored. You would be able to harness your natural resource and subsequently reduce your dependency on fossil fuels. But the real challenge remains is what happens during this intermittent period. If you look at oil today in India will touch more than $100 a barrel. So where we have stopped investing in identifying oil wells and producing oil from 2015, this impact is there. I think unless we address this, that how are we going to enhance the pace and bring these innovations happening quickly, I think the end goal will sound sweet, but currently it will be leaving you with a sour taste today, as India still imports major portion of their fossil fuel of oil, and that is going to impact the fiscal deficit out here. So, the impact on the Indian growth story would be good, but at the cost of inflation coming in picture. So this is how I look at it. And again, it goes back to the same story of the government taking initiatives with the private sector in place, implementations of policies quickly, bureaucratic hurdles to be reduced, and encouragement to be given, subsidies to be challenged. Okay. So once we do that, I think we would be in the right space, and the importance of solar still remains intact.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt, the EV industry is to boom in the next 2 to 3 years. In fact, I've seen many people shifting their focus towards electric vehicles nowadays. As you mentioned about a grid connected EV charging system just now, I think this system will take us on the path of the real utilization of the clean energy or green energy, as we say. The future looks sustainable. Siddharth, I would like to understand Vemco Solar's future action plan or perspective with regards to the solar grid connected system project executions. And where does Vemco Solar sees itself in the upcoming 5 years?
Priyanka, an excellent question. I think a very important point that you have basically mentioned in this is the grid connection systems and perspective to the project execution. I think the future may look rosy. There is good amount of opportunity that one can visualize. But as I mentioned earlier, either let it be a perspective with respect to the implementation and execution of policies, or implementation and executions of projects by private public sector companies or only private sector companies, that is going to define how quickly and how realistically we will be able to achieve the targets that have been set by the central government and our honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji. With respect to Vemco Solar, I think we go hand in hand with the industry. We are very strongly operational focus. Our job pertaining is not only to execute projects, is also to have the right amount of experience for our clients in terms of whatever has been committed by them with respect to their green energy investments, the commitments to sustainability, and I think we go hand in hand with them. 5 years hence, I think Vemco Solar plans to expand their reach. It also plans to start financing for these projects, offer end-to-end solutions, right from the value generation that looks at designing, evaluating, and executing and completing and managing all these assets over a period of time. That is what we plan. And another aspect is also, Vemco Solar is looking at giving clients the right kind of experience as well as the commercial viability for their projects. I think it's very important once you do that. So I think in a larger vision perspective, I think Vemco Solar wants to commit itself to the factor of sustainability, contribute in the minimal and the most largest possible factor of bringing nearer to the goal of zero emission. I think this is what we look at larger vision. So, of course, at the core of everything is our ethics and morality that we would like to maintain. I think this is what we look at Vemco Solar. We want to be energy partners to all our clients. We also want to be energy partners to CSR activities. We want to help also make our clients self-sustainable, and we don't want them to depend, and of course contribute to the society at large. I think it's a very simple future that we look at. A future of sustainability, a future of a greener environment, a future for the generations to come. So this is all what we look at Vemco Solar for.
I like that, Siddharth. The installation of new solar ideas in the coming future. That's excellent. So all in all, if we are planning to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels for transportation, the integration of solar into the existing grid system seems a very important step towards achieving the goal. Siddharth, thank you for being here today and having an insightful conversation with us.
Thank you, Priyanka. It was nice talking to you. It was a very meaningful conversation, and we could catch up on some more conversations like these in the coming future.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Siddharth. Further, I would request our listeners to subscribe to the channel of Vemco Solar and check our website vemc.co.in to learn more about the solar projects we are doing and upcoming new technology in the renewable energy industry. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please be sure to subscribe, and if you appreciate our show, please jump over to the iTunes and give us some stars. That's all for today. Bye.